Welcome to the 5th Lakota Wisdom series. We're here with Joseph Marshall III, and all of the other calls have been slightly different. They've all kind of taken on a life of their own, and the reason that this started is because I have huge reverence for Joseph Marshall, which I'm pretty sure he's clear about by now. He has written books that really touched my soul. And in one of our conversations, he said that there was a study that showed 40% of Americans thought the indigenous was extinct. And that to me was just outrageous. And I said, I want to do this series with you on YouTube. And he said, well, what does that mean? And I said, I don't know. Let me send you a general outline. Will you do this with me? And he said, sure. So here we are. I've learned lots of things over this series. I've learned lots of stories. I still have even more, the utmost respect for you, Joseph.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for being
here. Thank you.
That's what I mean. That's what's so beautiful. So our guest, Joseph Marshall III, was born and raised on the Rosebud Sioux Reservation and holds a PhD from the Reservation University, which he helped establish. He's a storyteller, a historian, and an award-winning author of 18 books, including Crazy Horse Weeps, The Lakota Way, and The Journey of Crazy Horse. His first language is Lakota. He handcrafts primitive Lakota bows and arrows, which if you're interested in one of those, you can view on one of the previous episodes we've done on the YouTube channel and see how he makes those bows. And you can also order one custom made from him. I've asked him, he's also a wilderness specialist. So I've asked him to do these with me. This is our final one. You have all been specifically handpicked and asked to be here because this one is not so much about story. I wanted the rest to be time for Joseph to share his background and share his stories because I wanted to curl up in front of a fire and just listen. And I was going to take some of you with me. So that's what the rest were about. This one is about a conversation. So I know Katie and I spoke before and you had some really interesting perspectives on things that you wanted to know about. Originally, this call was called What's the Way Forward or What's Next? But it's just a community conversation. So those of you that have been in conversation with Joseph before, you may have had questions and it was a lot of listening and witnessing and being, and I thank you for being with me on those. This one, again, is a conversation. We're all adults here, so feel free to take your mics off mute unless there's noise in the background that's going to be distracting. If you are moving around a lot, please mute your video so it's not distracting, or just don't move around a lot. We're not here for super long. I think you can handle it. And let's just have a conversation. So if you have questions for him, if you have ideas you want to dig into and chew into, let's do that. I think that there's a lot of things happening in our world right now that we can look back to old ways of being, old wisdom from cultures that really value community. And that is important to me and it's close to my heart. So I'm going to have each of you go around and introduce yourselves and tell us why you're here. And then we'll just kind of move with the flow. Sound good for everybody? Thumbs up. Okay. Katie, what made you say yes? And why are you excited to be here? And, stuff.
I like how you're just Katie. Well, I've been on, I think, 2 calls now, and I've really cherished everything I've taken from these calls. And I enjoy the community that I've witnessed and been a part of through your series. And, I'm not going to pass up the opportunity. And I also had some questions, and I'm surrounded by small children a lot of the day. So this is like my dessert where I get to talk and listen to things above, kindergarten level. So that's sort of why I'm here. And I'm really excited to be here with you all and enjoy this evening. So thank you for everyone for their presence here.
Valerie.
Hello, everyone. My name is Valerie Marak. For much of my life, I was a documentary filmmaker. Now I am a speaker and life coach, possibility coach. And I am here. I was very excited. I spent a few years spending some time with a Blackfoot medicine woman who, interestingly enough, she's passed now. Interestingly enough, even though she was Blackfoot, she didn't speak Blackfoot. We all know the history of that, right? But when she did her sweats, she spoke in Sioux. She had to have an interpreter in her sweats to translate from English to Blackfoot and Sioux. So, she's very dear to me. I've been told she is guiding me still today. And I have been missing an indigenous connection in this plane. And then I met Christina and she invited me to this conversation. So I'm very excited. Joseph, thank you for also opening up the possibility for my presence to be here. And yeah, so the work that I do is in the realm of how we embrace conflict transformationally and create peace, power, and possibility. And that's why I'm here.
Great. Good to hear.
Beautiful, Valerie. Thank you. I gave everyone a heads up that you worked a little bit with the Dalai Lama during your documentary stuff.
Oh yes.
And I think it's great that you didn't say any part of that, because I was like, she's really excited to be here and she's worked with the Dalai Lama.
Which was another transformational
I'm sure
experience in my life, yes.
We had a great conversation around that. It was really fun. I'm so glad you're here, Valerie.
Thank you.
Gary, last but definitely not least.
Yes, thank you, Christine. Yeah, Christine and I have had quite the journey this year, meeting each other and her really helping me out a lot on my spiritual journey this year, which has pretty much prolonged my entire life, thanks to my parents. And I'm very excited to be here just because my mother always pushed my brother and I to connect back with our indigenous cultures that go back multiple generations in our family. So even though we've been a little bit separated from the colonial world, we've always been making an exerted effort to connect with our indigenous cultures, which are Blackfoot and Cherokee.
Okay.
So very, very happy to be here.
Thank you, Gary. Do you know your video's off, my dear?
My video's off?
Yes. Oh, now it's back. Now that you're not talking.
It might be my bandwidth. So let me make an adjustment and see what's going on.
All right. While you figure that fun stuff out, Joseph, why did you say yes to our series? And what have you thought so far? Well, not so far. Now this is our last one. What have you thought? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think I said yes because I was curious. That's one reason. There are two big reasons. One, curiosity. And two, I try not to pass up any opportunity to offer a Native perspective. Note that I said a Native perspective, not the Native perspective. So those are the two reasons that I said yes. Just to see how it would work out and to take advantage of an opportunity to inform people, maybe educate a little bit. I mean, we can't do that, in 5 hours, everything about Native people. That's hard to do. That's difficult. It's impossible to do. But it's important for you all to know that we as Native people have our own outlooks, especially those of us who are still rooted in our traditional culture. We have different perspectives and outlook and opinions on what the world is now. So those are the reasons I said yes.
And you discovered along the way that you love spending time with me?
Oh, well, absolutely.
Ta-da! Okay, so I don't know why I feel like I want to do this like a game show. I'm just in this weird place today. So probably because I see those squares. Who wants to go first? Who has questions? Who wants to engage first? Who wants to open the dialogue into curiosity? Katie.
I'll go first. Volunteer. Just kidding. So I was talking to Christina earlier, and I was trying to figure out how to formulate this question. But I was reading about all the technology that's going on today, specifically with nanotechnology, which I went ahead and wrote down the definition of. Nanotechnology is the manipulation of materials on an atomic or molecular scale, especially to build microscopic devices, placing atoms as though they were bricks. Nanotechnology will give us complete control over the structure of matter, allowing us to build any substance or structure permitted by the laws of nature. And the article I was reading was called Conquering the New Frontier with Nanotechnology. So I looked up frontier just to make sure I knew what that was. And it says it's a line or border separating two countries. Mm-hmm. And my question, well, it's maybe not a question, but what are your thoughts about us going in and conquering what I perceive as this new frontier, almost in a similar fashion that we conquered the native land? Are we going to regret that? Is there a pause that we should be taking? Should we look at our internal structures, cellular structures, as a frontier to conquer? That's my question.
Okay, very, very interesting. And I'll be totally honest with you about, in the way I answer. There's one word that bothers me in your comments, and that's the word conquer. The word conquer, and other words like assimilation, overwhelm, overrun, absorb, are all part of the colonizer mindset. And when you go into a situation with the idea to tame or to conquer, you're going to end up making it a lot different than it was, or diminish what it was. And if you look at the world around you, that's exactly what happened. Look at what the English, the Dutch, the Spanish, and the French, and other people have done to the rest of the planet. They took over Africa, they took over India, they took over places where indigenous cultures were already thriving. And with the idea that they looked only at the superficial things that were there, the gold, the oil, the lithium, those kinds of things. That's what they wanted to enrich themselves and to make their lives better. Their lives, not necessarily the whole world, but only theirs. So when any group of people goes into a situation with that mindset, immediately you're going to, they will probably, maybe subconsciously, unconsciously, inherently shape things that are new to suit their obvious needs, their physical needs, to the detriment of their spiritual needs. And that's what's happened throughout the history of mankind. And anybody who unabashedly, honestly, realistically studies history of human interaction can't help but come to the same conclusion. Certainly, I'm reminded of the phrase at one time, the sun doesn't set on a British Empire. That was a boastful statement saying that the British controlled most of the world. But really, what does that mean, control? And that falls into the same category of thinking as conquer and tame, overwhelm, and so forth. Let me give you a thought. There are countries in the world that are known for certain things. Switzerland is known for their watches, right? We all sort of agree on that. And maybe their chocolates. Germans are known for their precision engineering. The French are known for their wines, and so on and so forth. You can go across the whole planet, and you'll come up with those kind of connotations, those kind of connections, where a region or especially a country is known for one thing over something else. And usually those things are physical in nature, not spiritual. Why is there not any country in the world that, for example, is known for their compassion? First and foremost. Why is there no country in the world that is first and foremost known for their wisdom, their generosity? Because that's what the world. Because the reason is that's what most of the world is not about. They're about superficiality and things. The physical world, gold, how to enrich, how to acquire power. That's what the world's about. So to answer your question, when we approach what technology is going to bring us, sure, we talk about our lives being improved. I don't agree with that. Our lives have been made easier, certainly. Look how we're communicating now. That's due to technology. And our lives have been improved, but have been made easier, but has it really made our lives better overall? It certainly made a few people in the world filthy rich. Bill Gates, Cecil Rhodes, people like that, because of their one invention that had to do with a process or something physical or an artifact. And that richness, that wealth has given them control, because we acquiesce to them simply because they're wealthy. We think we erroneously equate wealth with knowledge and insight and all those other things that we hope that someone has. That's the mistake. So when we're looking in, and technology, unless the world comes to a screeching end, which it certainly might do that, technology is going to lead us into different quote unquote frontiers. But I fear that the benefit is going to be reaped by those who are in control of the processes and things. And there will be further enrichment. And there'll still be more little black kids killing themselves mining lithium in places like Africa. If we can get away from that, and if we can find ways to truly make our lives better, to truly improve the human condition with what we know and what we can do, then it's not dangerous. But if we approach it with the mentality, okay, here's another frontier to conquer, like we conquered North America, like we conquered Africa, like we conquered India, like we conquered Australia. If we approach it that way, it's not going to be of benefit to us as human beings.
Thank you. I too had an issue with the word conquering and the frontier aspect. Right. And I also feel, and maybe this would add on to it, is this idea that and I think it goes along with it, is this reductionist principle of conquering a thing out of fear or control. And in that reductionist way of viewing, for example, a disease, a virus, we are not able to see its connectivity to Mother Nature and how it might serve a purpose greater than ourselves, and that interconnectedness. And I worry that if we go into our biology, into our cells and change it, we might do what we've done to the surface of our land, in that we create irreparable damage because we've isolated the idea of, I see a problem, let's crush it. And instead of seeing it as either a warning sign, like, hey, we're having a problem here, and we need to change the way we live and work with nature and improve our life in a more holistic sense. And I don't mean holistic like hippy dippy, I mean holistic like the whole. And I'm actually quite concerned about it. And when I try to talk to people about it, I feel like I'm talking to a wall a lot of times. Like they are thinking that all they see right now in front of their face is the fear of death right now, instead of the bigger picture that I'm seeing, like all of human race and the planet. So that's where I'm thinking too. So thank you for your words.
You mind if I jump in on that? Because Katie and I were talking about that, and I think it's really fascinating, because we were talking, she goes, you think I should bring this to the conversation? I was like, yeah, that's interesting. Katie, do you mind if I bring up some of the things you stand for?
Go for it. Sorry, I had a little interruption with the little one.
Tessa is the most adorable. She is just so cute.
She's cute.
So Katie really fights hard against unnecessary vaccines, or maybe all vaccines. I mean, you can speak to that in general, because something I learned through Katie is that vaccines don't, you can't sue a vaccine company if there are damages. If there's harm, they're protected. They cannot be sued. And that to me is a conflict of interest. And so that's where she's coming from, which she reads a lot of things in that world, and she's been concerned about calling it a new frontier, and exactly what you're talking about, Joseph, with the mentality of this conquering, as though it's something to be controlled rather than worked with. And I think all of us are here in this conversation right now because there's a part of us that's calling us to go back to these older ways that honor the earth, that honor each other's humanity, and that honor spirituality, in that we are just a small piece of something so much bigger.
Exactly.
What are you guys thinking? Who wants to pop in here? Conversation. Unmic yourselves.
This is Valerie. I'm thinking of the country of Bhutan. Bhutan has something they started in the 1970s called the gross national happiness, rather than the gross national product.
Right.
And they judge their gross national happiness on 4 pillars. One is good governance. The second is sustainable development. The third is preservation and promotion of their culture. And then the fourth is environmental conservation. And I'd love your opinion of those 4 pillars. Is there anything that you would add to that?
Maybe I think those 4 fairly well cover a lot in an ancillary way, but maybe I would add to that something directly connected with family and community. Our Lakota culture is predicated on a strong central family, but that also went out to the extended family as well. And then the next step was the community. Each village was made up of people who were related to each other and who chose to live together. And because we knew that the one governing rule the one societal norm that would sustain us was we had to take care of each other. When a leader was chosen, one of the things that people looked for in that leader was the virtue of looking after others first before he or she looked after himself or herself. So if there's something that specifically focuses on strengthening the family, keeping it strong, and teaching those values to each generation, I think that's the only thing I would add.
Thank you.
I have one question before Gary pops in here with his questions. How do you, let me see how I can phrase this. So with having the value of a leader putting other people first,
Mm-hmm.
how do you reconcile that with things like codependence and people that put other people first too much to the point where they're overwhelmed or to the point where they don't fill their own cup? Like how do you align those? I don't know if I'm asking it the way I mean for it to.
I think I know what you mean. But see, you're asking it from the perspective of now. Our contemporary families, our contemporary communities, our contemporary, and codependency was not such an issue among the Lakota pre-reservation. Codependency became part of the milieu of things that were heaped upon us by European society. When we were forced to live like them, when we were forced to think like them, then all their ills were also saddled with, not just the alleged good parts of their culture, but all the bad parts as well. People just, have a hard time understanding just how cohesive families and extended families and communities were in pre-reservation days, because everything that was done, everything that was taught, predicated on taking care of your family and your friends and your relatives before you took care of yourself. That was it. That was the value that was taught to little kids from the time they were able to speak, not just from what they heard in instruction, but how the family functioned.
And so I'm guessing because it was taught to children and it was so ingrained in the culture and everybody was on the same page of that cultural value and everybody put each other first,
Right.
Codependency wasn't even an issue because everybody put everybody else first. So everyone was always taken care of.
Exactly.
That's beautiful. And this is why I love you and I love the culture.
Obviously, we all have tendencies to be selfish, but if somebody did something selfish or said something selfish, I don't care what age they were. Usually it was not an adult, but it was a younger person in the process of growing up and learning still. Then one, they were not scolded. They were not put down. They were not belittled. They were invited to speak to someone about the issue gently and lovingly, saying, this is what you said or what you did. This is why it doesn't fit in with the rest of us. It doesn't fit in with what we're about.
Got it. I love that so much. My heart is warm. My heart is so warm. Gary, you've been quiet, patiently waiting. What questions do you have?
It's such a fascinating discussion. I love it. So I'll give you a little bit of background just on the arts industry, and I'm not sure how much any of you have been involved in performing arts. And this is dance, this is ballet, this is opera, this is stage plays, stage theater, which is kind of half of me is that, and then the other half has been engineering the last 20 years, and I relatively have retired from that, as Christine well knows. She's trying to help me with the transition fully into the arts now. Something that has happened this year, and it was all a result of the George Floyd incident, is that the arts industry has pretty much pulled a 180 and is now very interested in looking at indigenous stories and BIPOC, I guess what we call them, stories of different ethnicities, and including actors of different colors and races and creeds and sexualities into the arts industry like never before. It's completely different. And I find myself in constant conversations with different theater companies about what they want to do going forward to be more inclusive, to tell less colonized stories, put them on stage, et cetera, et cetera. So my question for you is, in terms of medicine stories, what are your thoughts about allowing medicine stories to be part of the storytelling that's in the theater arts world? And if, it really seems like the door is wide open now and we have the keys to the car, like, I don't know what's going on. Even the powers that be are taking a step back and allowing us to do whatever we want. So in terms of that, what are your thoughts about how we can start telling these medicine stories to the masses?
Well, first of all, by learning from the source, from the indigenous communities, because they're the ones who will tell you how far you can or can't go in putting these stories out to the mainstream public. Some indigenous cultures are much more stringent about that than others. It used to be that, as far as I know, the Navajo art of sand painting was so restricted and sacred that no outsider was allowed to witness it being done or witness or look at it after it was finished. That's not the case anymore. People have taken photographs of it. They've done documentaries on how it's done, and all the materials that are used in it and so forth. And unfortunately, that can happen over time, by people being relentless about wanting to show that to the rest of the world. And I don't know who in the Navajo culture made the decision to say it's okay, but someone did. So now it's out there. Same way with our one of our, if not, the most sacred ceremony to us is a Sundance. And generally speaking, it's done over a period of 4 days. There's days of preparation and days of coming down afterwards, but it's done 4 days. The dancing is encompassed 4 days.
Right.
And still today, no one is allowed to photograph it, while it's being happened, while the dancers are being prepared, while they're dancing, while they're being pierced, and so forth. But now, in the last couple of years, I've been seeing photographs on Facebook, on the internet, of the Sundance Arbor. We have not yet seen photographs of Sundancers dancing, but we've seen Sundance Arbor. We've seen photographs of the tree and so forth on Facebook, on whatever. And to traditionalists like me, that doesn't wash. I don't mind sitting here and telling you what a Sundance is, what its meaning is, how it fit into our culture, and why we have it, and why we still do it. I don't mind doing that, but I'm not going to show you photographs of the actual event. To us, that's taboo. So each culture will let you know, no, you can't do that, or you can't say that about this, or you can't draw pictures and so forth. But having said that, there are several books by an author named T.E. Males. His initials are T and E. T.E. Males. He's an artist, and he's done several really big books talk about Lakota, native, especially Northern Plains, artifacts, lodges, hunting lifestyle, and he's even put out a book about the Sundance, where he actually does sketches and published them in a book. He was obviously there to witness it. So someone has already done that. As far as I'm concerned, that doesn't mean just because it was in the book doesn't mean it was the right thing to do. So I don't think most of us who are traditional, and I have a nephew who's a medicine man, have any problem of saying, okay, this is what a ceremony, a healing ceremony is for, and this is why we do it. But and sometimes there are outsiders who come in, meaning non-native people, who actually come and ask for help. But I've also known people who have come and asked to participate just out of plain curiosity, with the intent to write something about it or lecture about it, or just, you know, some reason that they didn't want clear about or admitted to when they went in. I was living in Wyoming several years ago, and I saw an ad in the local paper. It said Lakota sweat ceremonies Wednesdays at 7 p.m. and it gave a phone number. And in that community, I thought I was the only Lakota person.
Wow.
It was a 89% white community, and there were Hispanics and other people of color. But I you know, having lived there for about a year, I didn't see any other Lakota people. So I called the number and said, I'm interested in your ceremony. When do you do it? And of course they said, well, it's Wednesday at 7 o'clock at my place. We have a sweat lodge behind in my backyard, and we have a fire pit and so forth. And I said, one, are you a sun dancer or are you a medicine man? And they were neither. Because only a sun dancer and only a medicine man can conduct a sweat lodge ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, are you native? And he said, no. Where do you get your enablement? Who empowered you to do this? Oh, I went to such and such a ceremony up on the Pine Ridge, and that's why I learned it. And that I brought it back here. I said, but did such and such say it's okay for you to do that?
Right.
No, not really. So there's that attitude of just appropriation without permission.
Without permission.
So there's that fine line. That's the fine
Mm-hmm.
line. That's the fine line. If we tell you this is a ceremony and we give you generalizations about what it is and how it fits into our culture and why we do it, then maybe what we're afraid of is you taking, or anyone taking that and saying, okay, I was authorized by such and such a person to tell this story and put it out there and then add more details than I gave you. So that happens. So that's really the kind of the fear that goes with it. I have no objection about our stories, about any aspect of our culture being told from our perspective.
Right.
From our perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And within the parameters that we say. If we say, you can tell this, and that's all we're going to tell you, so you can't tell anymore. And you nod your head and say, okay, fine. And then you go out and do elsewhere. See, that's the danger. That's the fine line that we're afraid somebody's going to cross.
Right.
Otherwise,
Okay.
You know, so that's the sensitivity to that. Otherwise, I have, and I'm not the only one that has no objection to our stories, our cultural stories, you know, our creation stories, our myths, all those things, our spiritual, you know, beliefs being put out there, because the world needs to know who we are, where we're from, what our perspective is, because we're part of this.
Exactly.
But there are dangers that come and drawbacks that come with it, unfortunately.
So just to
Excellent.
clarify
Yeah.
what you're saying, Joseph, as long as there's an advisor that is native, that's the one making sure that story is being done its justice and being honored and being treated as sacred, then it's probably okay.
Yeah, I think it's no certain
Mm-hmm.
it'll be okay.
So would you be willing to be an advisor for some of his shows that he wants to do?
Absolutely.
All right.
There you go. If you
That
want to
is-
connect,
But be careful. That doesn't mean I know anything.
it's always about
I
it.
can advise all
Of
you
course.
want. It doesn't mean I know anything. So therein lies the danger.
You are a storyteller. You are a storyteller. Just own it. Just own it. So I will connect Gary and Joseph. Gary and Joseph, I'll connect you too, so that if you want to start creating a story, Gary, that's a play, you can have Joseph as your advisor. We have his permission. And I recently sent you, Joseph, a video from SAG-AFTRA. I'll send it to you too, Gary. That's they were talking about indigenous stories and how that's coming into media and how that's coming into plays, theater, and things of that nature. And I haven't watched it yet. I was gonna say I haven't watched it all, but that's a lie. I haven't watched it yet. It's like in my inbox, and I was like, send out, and then life. So I have not yet, but I've heard from other people that sent it to me that it was really good, and it just came out last week. So there's things happening in the world of theater and the world of SAG-AFTRA.
Conversation is constant and continuous. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm curious, Valerie, since you've done documentaries, what do you think about this topic?
Okay, first, would you please also send that to me?
Yes, ma'am, I will.
Thank
Do you want it too, Katie? Okay. I will send it to all of you.
Well, it was interesting. And I know we only have a couple of minutes here, so I will completely digest this. I did not end up on the Blackfoot Reservation exactly willingly. As a matter of fact, I was trying to avoid it because I was trying to avoid somebody that had moved to the reservation, a Blackfoot man that had been living in Seattle for many years. And that's a long story and irrelevant. And I came with a friend of mine that is a healer that Al is the name of the gentleman that I was trying to avoid. He wanted my advice, and then he came to me because he wanted to make a documentary of his tribe, telling certain stories, and every time I would give him my advice, which is just my advice, right? It's just what I know to say, and I'm saying it from my accumulation of knowledge and my heart, he would always argue with me. And I got so tired of his arguing with me, I didn't want to see him anymore. But my friend Vicky got invited to go, and so she talked me into accompanying her. And so Al and Vicky and I spent weeks on the reservation arguing with one another, and Al would show us things and instruct us in things, and we met lots of medicine people, etc. And I met several medicine women, and I really began to see, like I had one idea, especially with the Blackfeet, the Blackfoot tribe, how the place of women, you know, a white person's view of what the place of women were, which was like down here, right? And I came to understand their super important role in the spirituality of the tribe. And of course, being a documentary filmmaker, I wanted to make a documentary about it. Right? Like I want to tell the world the truth, kind of thing. And Muffet Little Dog, who I became good friends with, who is the medicine woman, she introduced me to many other medicine people, and some of them would talk to me and others wouldn't talk to me. Some gave me permission to tell their story, and others were like, well, I'm going to talk to you, but my story is my story. It's not for you to tell. And so what I learned about that is exactly, Joseph, what you said. It's really important to make sure that one has permission. And you know, I also was invited and allowed into a Sundance, and that's something I don't talk about, right? Because it's not mine to talk about.
Right.
And it literally changed my life witnessing that, you know, literally. And you know, I don't talk about it because it's not mine. And yeah, so I'm in complete alignment as a documentary filmmaker and as someone full of curiosity and goodwill and all those other things that, yeah, I
appreciate it.
yeah.
Well, and I think what would be really beautiful too is having more of the language preserved.
Oh,
Like
yes.
whenever Joseph, you speak in Lakota, I'm just like, the first time I heard it was in one of your books. You said something in Lakota, and I was driving through New Mexico at the time, coming from California out to New York, and I'm just sobbing as I'm driving, and I'm like, why am I crying? And I knew that this was 2 years ago, and I was like, I have to know you. I have to know you. And here we are. And every time I'm like, I can't believe that I had that thought then. And so I would love to see more of that in the mainstream world so that that language continues, because there's something so beautiful about it.
Sure. Well, in that vein, consider these. The mainstream historians and
Don't make me cry.
no, I'm not. Linguists say mainstream, the white guys say that there were around 500 native tribes. I don't believe that as far as I can throw any one of them. When you consider the length and breadth of this continent, from the Arctic all the way down to Mesoamerica and both coasts, native people, indigenous people inhabited every part of this continent, not just where the weather was good and resources were plentiful, but every place. And not only did they just survive, they thrived.
Right.
We don't know what the population was. I mean, the estimates vary from 3 million to 20 million. Nobody knows. But consider the case of California, where there's a lot of mountain ranges. Sometimes there would be a small tribe living in this one mountain valley and a totally different tribe living in the next mountain valley. So when you consider that the environment has a direct impact on how indigenous people live their lives, if one indigenous group restricted their movements and their lives to one mountain valley without crossing over into the next one and spoke an entirely different language than the next people over the next mountain range, then that leaves the possibilities wide open that there's more than 500 indigenous tribes. I think there were probably anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 different native tribes. That being the case, that's how many different languages there were. There were as many different languages as there were different groups. And we're never going to know how many. That's the sad thing. We're never going to know how many. We do know now that there are 560 some federally recognized tribes. The irony in that is that the very government who tried to stamp us out now says, okay, you guys are Indians. But there are more than that of ethnically identifiable tribes, probably close to the 700. The sad part about it is, of those 700 or so ethnically identifiable tribes, which includes the federally recognized tribes, there are only 160 some languages still left. So that's the sad part. Most of those tribes have lost their language. Most, in some cases, without any hope of recovering their language. It's gone. Those languages are gone. And there are some of us who are right on the cusp of losing our language, because first language speakers, my generation, we're dying out. And while there are people who are learning the language, they're not learning it in the form that we know it, the way I learned it. So, you know, that's the sad fact about language.
So I have a burning question. If I can find you someone to put together a course on teaching the Lakota language, Would you be interested in that?
Well, I'm already doing that for a few people. I'm doing it one-on-one with a nephew of mine here in New Mexico. I do it over Zoom with a nonprofit in South Dakota, the staff of that nonprofit. So I do it wherever I can, as long as it's Lakota people.
Got it.
So that I can do my little bit to preserve the language, so that it goes on.
Go ahead, Valerie.
Yeah, I have this question. It's not, I don't have it worded well, so I apologize.
I didn't either. I just go ahead. We're just in conversation. I'm conscious of the time. Are you guys okay? I'm okay to stay like 10 minutes after. How are you guys?
That's fine.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to ask a couple of, like 2 or 3 questions that move into each other. How do we, by we, you know, how do people, you said, you made mention before that you would, you know, like to see somehow for the culture, the indigenous culture, to grow in respect and others' knowledge of it and how important it is to the future. How do we honor that and help you allow it or help you make it grow in the world, respect for it and embracing of it?
Well, first, let me answer it this way. There was a myth, a misperception, very recently, as recent as maybe 3 or 4 decades ago, and maybe there still are people who believe this, that an Indian is an Indian is an Indian. That's not true. As I said, there are probably 700 or so ethnically identifiable tribes still left in the United States alone. There are some in Canada, some in Mexico, some in Central America. And each of us are different. There is not one indigenous culture, one Indian culture. No, there's nothing further from the truth. A minute ago, I said that the natural environment impacted Native cultures. It shaped our languages, it shaped our lifestyles, it even dictated what kind of dwellings we should build because of the resources that was there, the climate that was there, everything. So the environment directly impacted how we live. And therefore, because the environment is different, our cultures are different. Some of us were whale hunters. We went out in the open ocean and hunted whales. Some of us fished in the rivers. Some of us chased buffalo on the plains. Some of us set fish traps in the bayous. So we're all different, and you know, as much as well as our languages being different. So first of all, the first thing we got to do is get rid of that attitude that there's one indigenous culture. There isn't. There are many, many different types of Native culture, and hence there are different kinds of heritage. There are different kinds of perspectives on each other and the rest of the world. So that's the first thing we do. And most of us, a lot of us are trying to preserve our culture, trying to revitalize it, our languages, and we're hindered by 2 things. By some of our own kind not supporting it. Some of us do. Many of us do, but not all of us do. And the other thing that hinders us is resources. In this day and age, unfortunately, it takes money to do things, to hire teachers, to buy the equipment necessary to put things on audio recordings or video recordings. All of that takes money. People are doing that to the extent that we have the resources to do it. I mean, not just on the Lakota reservations, but all over Indian country. You know, some of us are better at it than others. Some of us have more money, some of us don't. So, you know, resources and the understanding that we're still here, maybe close to 3 million of us still here in all those tribes, but we're less than 1% of the population, and we're all different from each other.
On the heels of that, what I think I've asked you this before. I don't remember if you sent me an email for it or not. I have too many things happening in my life. What is one organization or a couple organizations that you really think are valuable that people can give to that do preserve Lakota culture for other Lakota?
Well, let's think beyond Lakota. In Lakota country, we have about half a dozen colleges, community colleges, full-blown colleges, and one university. That's just in Lakota country. Overall, in this country, there are 38 native controlled colleges. Most of them are community colleges. Most of them are small. But what we're trying to do is preserve our language and our culture and tell the reality of our history. So, you know, let's not limit it to Lakota as much as I would like to. There are 38 different institutions of higher learning controlled by natives people themselves. The board of directors are natives. A lot of the staff, teaching staff, are natives. So, you know, if you're going to give resources to somebody, you know, look up the native colleges in your area or near where you live. There's a group called the Consortium, Indian Higher Education Consortium. IHEC, Indian Higher Education Consortium. The acronym is IHEC. They're the blanket organization that all these native institutions are part of. And they will be glad to give you information as to where those institutions are located, on what reservation, in what state, and so forth. And all of those institutions have their own foundations for raising money.
Got it. And just to clarify, I think that what you were saying about, to go back, what Gary was bringing up about bringing it into the world as art and bringing indigenous culture into theater and things like that. I think Gary excluded, because I'm going to make a bad joke. Those of us whiteys that don't necessarily, know the full culture, it's important to identify which tribe the story is from, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. And so if you consulted for one that Gary is doing, or maybe Gary and Valerie put together, do you guys want to be on a whole email, by the way, after the call? Okay, got it. I'm not going to ask you again, Joseph. I asked you before. So I think what I'm hearing, and I just want to kind of parrot this back and make sure I'm hearing it correctly, is that if it's going to be depicted, that it's depicted in a way that's sacred, that honors the tradition, and that honors the tribe that it came from. Right. Because I think those of us that are not indigenous, or at least if we have indigenous in our background, we're not, we weren't raised in that culture, right. that we where was I going? Hold on, don't say anything. I think the reason that we tend to think of just indigenous as indigenous is because there's pieces in American culture specifically that we are desperately missing.
Right.
Like community and spirituality. And those two are inherent in all of the indigenous cultures, right. In my perspective. And I think that those of us on the call can probably agree that that's, when we're saying indigenous culture, that's what we're saying. We're saying we miss community, we miss spirituality, and we miss the oneness. And that's what we see in those cultures. And what you're furthering is that even though there's that common thread, it's also different.
Right. We'll do it in different ways.
Right.
Christina, I wanted to say I agree with you. I wanted to ask a similar question when we're talking about preserving your culture, and I'm truly learning a lot about it. and I'm loving learning it. And as I'm learning it, I want to have it for myself to embody. And some of the principles I'm learning about how we should look at things for 7 generations on before we take it, right? Like some really beautiful pieces that I wish, and I don't even wish, I think are necessary for the planet right now to adopt. How do we adopt without stealing? Or, I mean, I want to adopt it in a way because I think it touches something like primal in my soul. That's truth, that's necessary, that's vital, that's missing. And along with the community aspect as well, like we're all in such isolation, even motherhood, you know, I wish I had a tribe of mothers, you know, but I don't.
Right.
And I long for that to be back in our DNA and in our system again.
Yeah. And before you answer, Joseph, I want to second that with, I think all of us here want to find ways to incorporate this into our being. The way that the stories that you've brought to us and the way of life that your books have brought to me, I want to have that be something I carry with me into how I relate to other people and my own tribe that I create. And how do I do that in a way that is respectful of the tradition and respectful of the culture, and still takes them on into me so that I get to live that way.
Well, let's take a step back and all consider one reality, that at one time, every culture, every group of people that still exists now went through the phase of having a lifestyle that's very close to Mother Nature, Grandmother Earth. Some of us are further removed from it than others by a lot of things, by industrialization, by farming, and by the monetary system. All those things have sort of insulated us from that time in our collective history. So there are a lot of commonalities that we all share as human societies. And the one that we have gotten away from is how we relate to the environment, how we relate to Grandmother Earth or Gaia or whatever we call this planet. And that's the one thing I think that Native communities will be very glad to teach what it's really all about. As I said, our cultures are influenced directly by the natural environment. And that's where we've come from. That's what our approach to life is. That's what our approach to being part of the world is. I heard a medicine man talk years ago, and he equated each group of people, he didn't say race, each group of people with one of the 4 elements, natural elements, earth, wind, fire, and water. He equated the black people to water, or to the wind, because they were the original people. Everybody was dark skinned at one time, and then when they scattered all over the earth, as we learned scientifically, then we became different colors. But he equated black people with the wind. He equated the yellow-skinned people with water. And interestingly enough, if you study the history of the Chinese and Koreans, for example, they built great sailing ships and did a lot of exploring that we don't know about in our collective history. And we Native people, the indigenous people, brown-skinned people, our element is earth. And we still have our spirituality. We still have our connection, for the most part, to earth. The element that is related to white people, white-skinned people, is fire. And fire consumes, fire destroys. And we've all those different groups of people have lived up to their association with whatever the element is, unfortunately. So we, the indigenous people, would like to teach those simple lessons of how to relate to the environment, whatever we call it. But, you know, one of the first steps that took us away as a race of humans away from that was domesticating animals and learning how to plant crops. just to make our life easier. And of course, that exponentially increased, took us further and further away from a natural existence based only on hunting and gathering. So those are the kind of lessons we'd like to teach or offer anyway.
Well, that doesn't tell me how I can incorporate these things in my life and make it okay.
Well, you can learn about what, you know, as much as possible, what those indigenous perspectives were about the environment. And you can do things like recycle. You can do things like connect directly with the earth. You can learn how you as an individual can help to stop spoiling or polluting or making the earth toxic. We all can do that.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. And I think that as we were talking before people came on here, this is the last piece I'll say for me, and then I'll check in with you guys, is that there's been such a melting pot, especially in the US, of different cultures and different people coming in and out, where a lot of us have variations of a lot of different things.
Right.
So I wonder if, you know, because of that, there's the four elements within most people. I mean, mine would probably just be earth and fire. Yeah, so I find that interesting. And we were talking about, you know, having both the conqueror and the conquered in your kind of bloodline. And I find that really fascinating because I have both sides.
Mm-hmm.
And that's interesting to me. And I have oppressed and oppressors in my family lineage, and making peace with that is a really interesting journey. And it's kind of, that was my last question. My last question is, what do the old ways speak to when it comes to like walking in the shadow and being with the shadow of your personality and being okay with the harder things so that you can embrace spirituality, so you can be one with your nature?
One of the first lessons we're taught in the old days, and I think it's one of the lessons that I learned from my grandparents, is to know yourself, first of all. Honestly, know yourself honestly. Not what you like to be, but what you are at this point in your life. What kind of a person am I? What skills do I have? What do I know? What are my weaknesses? What are my strengths? And it's a work in progress. That's the first thing that you understand or learn. And the second thing is we're taught that everything in the world is connected. We're all related. In fact, the last phrase that we say when we finish a prayer is Mitakoye Oyasi, which means all my relatives. It's not just human relatives, it's every living thing, it's everything that's on this earth. We acknowledge that connection and we revere it. We don't ever forget about it. We honor that connection and we don't do anything to damage it. We look at life as not linear, but circular. You know, and every living thing has a place on that circle. No one is first, no one is last, no one is higher, no one is lower. It doesn't matter who you are or what you are. And that's a operative principle still for some of us.
I could stay here all night. But in the essence of respecting all of our times, I'm going to go around with each one of you and ask you for your final thoughts. Just a few minutes of what you got from this, what your impact was. Any final things that you want to say, like 2 or 3 minutes each. Maybe less. I know we are already over time. I'm so grateful that all of you have been so gracious with this. This feeds my soul being here. And I'm going to talk you into more, Joseph. You just don't know it yet. So I'm going to go through each one of you and in the order I see you, and I just want to know your final thoughts. I'll come to you last, Joseph. Valerie.
Well, first of all, thank you, Joseph, very much for saying yes to Christina and Christina, thank you for asking Joseph and creating this together. This was really lovely. And I think I loved your last words about know yourself honestly, and all beings are connected, and not even beings, I mean, the rocks, right? And plants, and all is connected. And I've missed being in conversation with that.
Mhm.
So I just want to say thank you.
I'm glad you were here.
Thank you, Valerie. Thank you for being here. I'm so glad that you said yes when I asked you. And I'm grateful that you came. I'm grateful that you're here. And I'm thinking maybe wisdom circles. Maybe we do those. Maybe once a month. We'll see. I'm going to convince you, Joseph. Gary, final thoughts.
Oh my gosh, it's always such a release to be part of a group like this and be amongst just brilliance and endless spirituality, because we're so inundated with colonization, and all of the narratives we're surrounded with are colonized. So being able to just speak in terms of decolonizing is so refreshing. And I feel like a million miles away from the normal world, so it's really a pleasure. And my passion now that I am fully in the arts is to decolonize stories. And there's just so much out there that we as masses have no idea about, because we're just following along with narratives that are presented to us. So just really feeling a sense of release, a sense of peace, and a sense of just excitement that able to maybe work with you in the future and create decolonized narratives.
Great.
Yeah.
That's a good thing.
I love that. I love that there's potential collaboration there. I love that you were here, Gary. It was perfect. And I'm just so grateful. So thank you for coming. Katie.
Well, I wanted to thank you, Joseph, for coming on. It's always a pleasure. And I've been feeling, to be honest, a lot of sadness lately and a lot of weight. And I keep hearing this idea of meeting between the spaces and this place where we can all really see that connection that you speak of as like the operative force of your culture. And to me, it speaks just so loudly, and I want the world to feel it the way I do. And it's sad. I just wanted to thank you, and it's really something I hope that our people, and I mean people as all human beings, can really understand soon. So that's it. Thanks.
I'm glad you were here.
I'm so glad you were able to come, Katie. You are one of my favorite humans, and being able to have the conversations we've had over the last few months has been healing for me in a lot of ways. We've talked about a lot of politics. We've talked about bringing love back into politics. We've talked about nature. We've talked about our bodies. We've talked about the things that we want to stand in as far as values. And everybody here on this call, Gary, Valerie, and absolutely, of course, Joseph, those of us that are here are because you're my people, you're my tribe, and I want to do the honor and the respect for past cultures and make sure that I don't step on any toes along the way, and I make sure to treat that as sacred, because I came back into this fold in a really special retreat in Santa Fe at the IAIA, which is a indigenous arts college, and it changed my life. And working with people that hold those things as sacred and are very careful with what they do share, opened me up into something I had never experienced before. And it led me down a whole path. It led me into meditation. It led me into a vision of Crazy Horse Monument, which led me to who the expert was on Crazy Horse, which is Joseph. It led me to your books. It led me here. And I just followed the breadcrumbs. And for those of you that don't know, the Crazy Horse Monument, actually, none of the proceeds from that go to indigenous culture. None of it goes to Lakota. And if any of you feel to take that on, I'm with you. And I think that it should go to the Lakota culture because it represents one of your leaders. So this series has been incredibly moving for me, incredibly nourishing and nurturing for me. And it reminds me that when I have those days like yours today, Katie, I told Joseph before we came on, mine was anger the last 2 days, and anger and tears and anger and tears. And it was this part of kind of feeling disconnected, feeling unseen, feeling frustrated with people in this me place when I'm so willing to give all the time, and feeling a little taken advantage of by just people. And I'm so, so grateful to be here with all of you, with each of you individually, and with all of us as a whole, and to have put this on and created this thing that didn't exist before. And your life will be different from these. I know mine has, from these conversations, even if you've only been here for one. And you'll take that into every community that you go into, in every conversation you go into from here forward. And I feel just so grateful to have been able to co-create that with you. So thank you. And Joseph, what are your final words? And please add some in Lakota.
Well, something that's been on my mind this past few days, because, and that's the pandemic. The very first person to come down, test positive on the Rosebud Reservation several months ago was one of my nieces. She's since recovered. But within the past 6 weeks, 2 of my brothers have come down with it and recovered, and a sister-in-law. And now one of my younger sisters is in the hospital with it. I think she's doing okay. But sooner or later, it gets personal for all of us. It will touch us all very closely. And I'm thinking about what's going on all over the world, but right now in South Dakota, there's an interesting scenario. And it relates to this interconnectedness of taking care of each other that I talked about earlier. Almost from the beginning, there are 8 reservations in South Dakota, 8 tribes, and each of them put out a mask mandate that all tribal members should wear masks. And we did. We didn't hesitate. We didn't say, no, it's impeding on my freedom. No, I don't think it's necessary. We did, because it's inherent in us, that cultural value that we do whatever necessary to take care of others. The interesting part of that scenario is over 90% of the white residents of South Dakota do not wear a mask. They are dismissing this pandemic as a hoax. It's not there. Even though the people in South Dakota are not dying at a higher rate, highest rate in the country, maybe even the world. I don't understand it. Because at some point, we should all learn 2 things: compassion for others and selflessness. That's what it takes. That's what it's going to take for us as human beings to mitigate this crisis. And so I would encourage you, if you believe as I do, to pass that on: compassion and selflessness. So thank you for this opportunity, and I'm glad I got to meet a lot of people on this forum, and hopefully something that I've had to say, some opinion that I've expressed, something that I've talked about has sort of turned on the light somewhere in your life. That's all I can hope for. Thank you very much. So I will close by saying, Chantewa shtea na pechiu zakalo, which means with a good heart, I shake your hand.
Thank you all. The biggest of love, the biggest hugs. I appreciate you all. I'm grateful for you. And I'll see you soon.
Great. See you soon.
Bye, everybody.